Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Hare Krishna. So, welcome to our second day of the Gauranga Katha, preceding our Guru Purnima festival on Monday. Thanks for coming and having a receptive ear for some attempt to give Gauranga Katha. So yesterday Krishna Mahaprabhu was speaking about how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the embodiment of pure love of God. The topic I picked, and which was also announced, is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from scholar to ecstatic. So from a person who is rather a so-called pandit, a learned person, to someone who is dancing and singing in ecstasy. So I would like to start with a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, which is expressing or like pointing out the connection between the cultivation of transcendental knowledge and the experience of the love of God. And this is actually also the first key verse of the Bhagavad Gita in 10.8. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matha sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajanti mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. Translation is, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. And the great sages who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So the first part of the verse is speaking about transcendental knowledge, speaking about to know who is Krishna, what is his position in relationship to the material world. Aham sarvasya prabhavo, I'm the source of everything that exists, all the material worlds, all the spiritual worlds. Everything emanates from him, so he's the cause, the source. And those who know that perfectly, Buddha, the learned, they come to the point of bhava samanvitaha. Here the word by word is with great attention, but in the verse itself it said they worship me with all their hearts. And what does it mean? They experience great affection, experience love, and therefore full-heartedly serve Krishna, because they understand who he is. So this is a very important connection for us, and we will later also hear from different parts of the Chaitanya Charitamrita how these two things are very closely together. Also in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is mentioning actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as an authority on this. And I'm going to read 2 verses. A learned scholar who has studied the Vedas perfectly and has information from authorities like Lord Chaitanya, and who knows how to apply these teachings, can understand that Krishna is the origin of everything, in both the material and spiritual worlds. And because he knows this perfectly, he becomes firmly fixed in devotional service of the Supreme Lord. He can never be deviated by any amount of nonsensical commentaries or by fools. So this purport, Srila Prabhupada is also giving us very clear hint on what is one of the functions of cultivating proper philosophy or Siddhanta. That means that we can be situated and firmly in what is proper understanding of Krishna Tattva and not be, how does he say, he never be deviated by any amount of nonsensical comments or sentimental speculations. So, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in his lifetime known in the first half of his life as a pandit, someone who taught Vedanta, who taught like these Bhakti Shastras. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu lived for 48 years. 24 of these years he spent as a grihastha. He married twice. And then 24 years he spent as a sannyasi. And from his 24 years, 12 years, he traveled to South India, well, like 10 years at least, and then 12 years he stayed in Jagannath Puri, so making it his place of residence, based on also the request of his mother. So this is a relatively short lifespan, and Srila Prabhupada is remarking, that's no problem. We should take also example from that. It doesn't matter so much how long you live, but it matters what impact you have in the time that you live. And he mentions a tree that might stand for hundreds of years. It might be even a tree that doesn't give any fruits besides this. But what's the purpose or the point, the value of being around for hundreds of years if there's no impact? But a person like this, who's being 24 years, 84 years around, but transforms practically the whole world, that's one's proper use of one's life to be of spiritual impact to others. That's Mahaprabhu's mission. And yeah, I would like to focus today on the transformation also of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from a scholar to an ecstatic person, and in general the connection between transcendental knowledge and spiritual ecstasies. Because we hear that there might be some people displaying spiritual ecstasies, but they are called so-called prakrita sahajyas. It means that these are people who not genuinely transformed themselves on this level, but imitate it cheaply and kind of more or less imagine themselves to be self-realized instead of truly being self-realized. And we have scriptures like the Nectar of Devotion from Rupa Goswami and so many other scriptures from the 6 Goswamis that give proper guidance on how to advance on the path of devotional service to genuinely develop deep affection and love of God. And the Chaitanya Charitamrita, written by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, has 3 sections, the Adi Lila, the Madhya Lila, and Antya Lila, which practically can be translated as the pastimes of childhood, and then or those in the middle. The first, the Adi, what comes first, Madhyam in the middle, and Antya at the end. So like cut the life into 3 sections, and then the Lila is the pastimes. So we find in the Adi Lila not only the Lilas concerning the pastimes in this childhood, also Krishnadas Kaviraj gives a synopsis of some things that come actually later Lilas. So, but we will start with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as a Pandit. Anyone has a guess, since we say he didn't turn so old and he was 24 years only around as a householder, what do you think, how old was he when he began to teach students?
16.
16?
8?
8?
6?
3? 6. Yes, the Chaitanya Charitamrita informs us at the age of 11, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu began to teach students. How old are you now? 12. So like approximately this age.
He's late already.
So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, at this very young age, he was already a teacher on Shastra. He was very learned, he was very powerful. And here it's written, this marks the beginning of his Kaishore age. As soon as the Lord became a teacher, many students came to him, every one of them astonished to hear his mode of explanation. The Lord defeated all kinds of scholars in discourses about all the scriptures, yet because of his gentle behavior, none of them were unhappy. So here Mahaprabhu also displayed 2 important qualities. He was not just learned and capable, competent, at the same time he was also pleasing. He was not agitating the minds of those he taught. And this perfectly represents what Krishna also teaches as the renunciation of speech, which is given in the Bhagavad Gita in the 17th chapter. Anudvegam charam vakyam satyam priyahitam chayat svadhyaya pyasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchyate. That there are particular types of penances or like renunciations regarding the speech. And one is like anudvegam charam vakyam, not agitating to others, satyam priyam hitam chayat, truthful, pleasing to others and beneficial. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu managed that perfectly. at the age of 11 years. So, the Lord as a teacher performed various kinds of pranks in his sporting pastimes in the water of the Ganges. After some days, the Lord went to East Bengal, and wherever he went, he introduced the Sankirtan movement. So here is also a very significant point Srila Prabhupada highlights in the purport, I'd like to read. Although Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees in the cyclic succession can defeat all kinds of learned scholars, scientists and philosophers in arguments, thus establishing the supremacy of the personality of Godhead, their main business as preachers is to introduce Sankirtan everywhere. Simply to defeat scholars and philosophers is not the occupation of a preacher. Preachers must simultaneously introduce the Sankirtan movement, for that is the mission of the Chaitanya cult. So Srila Prabhupada uses this word also here, the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, rightly his mission. So Mahaprabhu was interested people understand Krishna, but not only understand by educating them in philosophy, but that they practically engage in the worship of Krishna by getting linked through Sankirtan. So that's essentially the message of Mahaprabhu. And this should be noted, he had both great learning and he was very much engaged in Sankirtan, singing and dancing. Sometimes we have also among devotees like kind of two lines. One of them say, we are rather study philosophy and we are more like the bookworms and we read and we are very Krishna conscious in that. That's one way which is incomplete if one only focuses on too much philosophy and studying. And the other thing, if you go only around to chant without learning, also without studying scripture and shastra, getting grounded in understanding, then also our chanting does not become very deep. Because chanting is deepened by understanding. The more I know, the more I can absorb in who is Krishna, what are his qualities, what are his pastimes, and what is my relationship with him, etc., etc. The more my chanting can be powerful. Otherwise, I maybe simply like to go around and make music. It could come to that level, if I'm not really also feeding the mind with proper philosophy. So Srila Prabhupada points out that's the mission of Mahaprabhu, introduce Sankirtan everywhere. So it further is described, struck with wonder by the influence of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's and intellectual prowess, many hundreds of students came to the Lord and began studying under his direction. So here he was still in East Bengal. In this way, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu contributed the greatest benefit to the people of East Bengal by initiating them into Harinam, the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and making them learned scholars by educating them. So that's what Mahaprabhu did, both introduced them to chanting and taught them proper philosophy. And that was also Srila Prabhupada, what he was doing. His main instructions to disciples was in the beginning, go out to Harinam, Sankirtan, and distribute books. These two things, give people knowledge and the process of chanting, and engage them in both. And sometimes he had to correct his students to say, when they kind of more or less, even naively or honestly saying that they don't really read the books, they only distribute them. He was mentioning, so you go out there saying, my dear sir, take this book, my spiritual master wrote it. I don't read it, I only distribute it. So making clear, what's the point? You should not just go around distribute it, you should also absorb yourself in reading it, and then also get people to chant. So here the purport Srila Prabhupada says, following in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Krishna consciousness movement is distributing the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and inducing people all over the world to chant. We are giving people an immense treasury of transcendental literature, translated into all the important languages of the world. And by the grace of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this literature is selling profusely and people are chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra with great delight. This is the preaching process of the Chaitanya cult. Since the Lord wanted this cult preached all over the world, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is acting in a humble way so that the vision of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu may be fulfilled all over the world, especially in the Western countries. This might be also remarked in the pranam of Srila Prabhupada. One of his glorifications is Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini. Gauranga Vani's instruction Pracharni. He was the one particularly who preached the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Western world, introducing them to the Chaitanya Katha. This is one of his particular glories that is also put into his pranam mantra. So when something happened, the Lord showed that although he was a householder, he was not so much around in his household, and this was not so pleasing to his wife. And he is written because first he was married to his first wife Lakshmi Devi, and it said she was very unhappy at home in separation from her husband. So the snake of separation bit Lakshmi Devi, and its poison caused her death. Thus she passed to the next world. She went back home, back to Godhead. So here's interesting. It seems tragic in one side, at the same time it's glorious. Tragic it is, but it seems because she is in separation and suffers that she is not together with her Lord, in a literal sense, with the Supreme Lord. And at the same time glorious it is because this was the reason that she gave up her body and went back to Godhead. And it's a beautiful reminder or like example that actually only this existence we can only give up if it becomes intolerable to us to be not together with Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself once remarked when he was approached and people said, "Oh Mahaprabhu, you have such great love for Krishna." And he denied, "No, I don't. If I really would have love for Krishna, then it should not be possible for me to live while I am not together with him. The proof that I don't have love is that I still live, although not being with Krishna," he says. Very profound, expressing that this would be the proof of my love if I would die without my beloved. So it was the intense feelings. So later on, there was a Vishnu Priya, who's the second wife, correct? So I stayed longer. So then the Mahaprabhu came back when his first wife died, back from East Bengal, and then also there when he went back, he educated others, and then something changed in him. By the strength of his education, he conquered everyone, and thus he was greatly proud. Then he turned a bit into this Pandit who was very successful in his preaching, and then he was apparently affected by pride and became a bit more of a challenging person. And once there was this incident that this one, if I'm correct, remember Digvichai, this great scholar, Digvichai came. He was very famous for his poetry in Sanskrit. And those who know a bit about Sanskrit know that it is an extremely complex language already. What to speak of writing poetry in a language? We might think of our own mother tongue in German or English or whatever you speak. Think of writing really exquisite poetry in it. It's a challenge already. So, but as Digvichai was very blessed by the goddess of learning, Saraswati, and he went around to challenge everyone in a practical, not just debate, but simply, comparing abilities in poetry. And he came there to Mahaprabhu, and he was with the students sitting at the Ganges, and he was welcomed respectfully, and Mahaprabhu kind of gave him proper respect. And then it came to the point that the Digvichai, he presented spontaneously, it's quite a feat, spontaneously 100 verses glorifying Mother Ganges. So 100 verses spontaneously in very eloquent Sanskrit, it's quite something. So, and then he was asking, so what do you say? How do you find this poetry? And then Mahaprabhu said one thing which was really, I like to read that when he's saying, "Your poetry is so great, only you and Mother Saraswati can understand it." Making the point, well, it was great, but who can understand? Only you and Mother Saraswati. So kind of being cynical, and Prabhupada remarked it also in the purport that Krishna also was entitled to do so since he's the Lord also of the goddess of learning. And then he pointed out, yes, there were many good things in your poetry, he was respectful. At the same time, there were some mistakes. And hearing that already, Digvichai was like, what? And who is this anyway, child, young Mahaprabhu, to tell me? And he was surprised. And then he was saying, okay, tell me what was wrong. And then Mahaprabhu spontaneously picked one of the 100 verses and recited it by heart perfectly. And this already astonished Digvichai. How can you just put 100 verses there spontaneously and you remember this one perfectly just by hearing once? It's one of the abilities, I forgot the Sanskrit name, but that you can hear things once and perfectly remember. And then Mahaprabhu pointed out in Sanskrit all the good things and the mistakes, and in this way actually defeated the great Digvichai, and this added to Mahaprabhu's own glory. So it's a nice pastime. You can read it in the Adi Lila. So it goes on, exhibiting his scholarship, beauty and fine dress, Lord Chaitanya danced as he chanted and distributed the holy name of the Lord to awaken dormant love of Krishna. Thus Lord Sri Gaurasundara shone his youthful pastimes. As he entered his youth, the Lord decorated himself with ornaments, dressed himself in fine cloths, garlanded himself with flowers, and smeared himself with sandalwood. By dint of pride in his education, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, not caring for anyone else, defeated all kinds of learned scholars while executing his studies. And he also made, in his youth, the Lord exhibited his ecstatic love of Krishna on the plea of disturbances of the bodily airs. Accompanied by his confidential devotees, he enjoyed various pastimes in this way. And here, Srila Prabhupada is remarking, on the plea of disturbance of the bodily air and metabolism, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu acted as if crazy. Thus in his school he began to explain the grammar of verbs through Krishna consciousness. Explaining everything in grammar in relationship to Krishna, the Lord induced his students to refrain from worldly education, for it is better to become Krishna conscious and in this way attain the highest perfectional platform of education. On these grounds, Sri Jiva Goswami later compiled the grammar entitled Hari Namamrita Vyakaranam. People in general consider such explanations crazy. Therefore, the Lord's purpose in his attitude of craziness was to explain that there is nothing within our experience but Krishna consciousness. For everything may be dovetailed with Krishna consciousness. These pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu have been very vividly described in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, Madhya Kanda, chapter 1. So Mahaprabhu, you can see here already some transformation happens. He takes that, what is the ground of solid philosophical understanding, and turns it around in an ecstatic mood, suddenly making interpretations others would consider crazy, putting everything in connection to it. This means Krishna, this means Krishna. So pointing out, let go of all this learning and simply become a lover of God. That was his point. So here's a very important part of his life. Thereafter the Lord went to Gaya. There he met Sri Ishvara Puri. In Gaya, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was initiated by Ishvara Puri, and immediately afterwards he exhibited signs of love of Godhead. He again displayed such symptoms after returning home. In the morning we chant Prema Bhakti Yaha heute Avidya Vinashayate. Prema Bhakti Yaha heute, like ignorance is dispelled and love of God is becoming prominent. That's one of the features of a pure Vaishnava. The pure Vaishnava instills love of God in his follower or student. And this is what happened here, like the process of initiation is an awakening. So here, with this powerful guru and the powerful student in Krishna himself, it is demonstrated how initiation is awakening love of God. Because it said immediately afterwards he exhibited signs of love of Godhead. Later we find also in the pastimes of Mahaprabhu speaking to the Mayavadi sannyasis, he's sharing a bit about his relationship with his guru. When they challenge him, hey, you're a sannyasi, and you're supposed to sit down, study Vedanta, be serious and sober. But you go around, you dance and chant, do all this like a sentimental fanatic. Why are you doing this? And then Mahaprabhu told them, my guru told me I'm a fool. Don't study. You don't have the brains, don't study. But you should simply use this mantra, Maha Mantra or Krishna Nam, and in this way make the advancement. And then he explained, and as soon as I started chanting this mantra, like I got into ecstasy and I can't help it, it just happens. And since then I chant and go around. So, making clear, like, just follow my guru, and this is the instruction, and it works. So, like, then he became more and more the ecstatic person, and this is described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila chapter 7. Then we go to the Madhya Lila, and here it is described how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu manifested ecstatic symptoms. And be warned, some of these things you're going to hear might be a bit disturbing. Because these transformations he experienced might be shocking if you think of it as a material body. So, but it is said these transformations happen only in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to this extent. But in his later life, he was practically only getting into it. We see a bit behind, like how Mahaprabhu was ecstatically dancing and crying tears, but that's just a tiny fragment of how his ecstasies look like. So now we come to this point where he manifests more of that. And it's said during his last 12 years, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu always manifested all the symptoms of ecstasy and separation from Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's state of mind, day and night, was practically identical to Radharani's state of mind when Uddhava came to Vrindavan to see the gopis. And we might remember like what the state of mind was. They were practically mad of separation. Even one symptom of ecstasy is called death. Radharani, the gopis, they were laying there and they were considered dead. They seemed to be lifeless, but it was a transcendental state of ecstasy because of the absence of Krishna. It might be a bit for us, but ooh. The Lord constantly exhibited a state of mind reflecting the madness of separation. All his activities were based on forgetfulness, and his talks were always based on madness. And now it starts. Blood flowed from all the pores of his body, and all his teeth were loosened. At one moment, his whole body became slender, and at another moment, his whole body became fat. The small room beyond the corridor is called a Gambhira. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to stay in that room, but he did not sleep for a moment. All night he used to grind his mouth and head on the wall, and his face sustained injuries all over. Although the 3 doors of the house were always closed, the Lord would nonetheless go out and sometimes would be found at the Jagannath temple before the gate known as Singhadwara. And sometimes the Lord would fall flat into the sea. Remember the story, also this picture of once a fisherman pulled him out of the ocean because in his ecstasy he completely forgot himself and floated in the ocean. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would also run very fast across the sandhills, mistaking them for Govardhan. As he ran, he would wail and cry loudly. Sometimes Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mistook the small parks of the city for Vrindavan. Sometimes he would go there, dance and chant, and sometimes fall unconscious in spiritual ecstasy. The extraordinary transformations of the body due to transcendental feelings would never have been possible for anyone but the Lord, in whose body all transformations were manifest. So this is something that is also important to hear that from time to time, what is happening there actually on this platform of ecstasy, to make also clear this, the person in spiritual ecstasy completely forgets about himself or his body. The only concern, the only longing, the only desire is Krishna. And if I can't have it, I go nuts, he would say. So that's, when Krishna is the only object of one's thoughts, feelings and wishes, then one is matured in Krishna consciousness. And here of course we hear Mahaprabhu only in his body. This is possible for the jiva, there's a different limitation, I would assume. But still, also Mahaprabhu teaches us how to be a devotee. And he teaches us from his life in his different stages, from childhood to youth, and being a bit older, that you go through a process of culturing yourself, studying, developing knowledge, at the same time engage in a process of devotion, and this way mature into someone who genuinely experiences ecstatic love for Krishna. That was his goal. And here it goes further. The ecstatic transformations of the body as described in such exalted scriptures as the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu are practically not seen in this material world. However, these symptoms were perfectly present in the body of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. These symptoms are indicative of Mahabhava, or the highest ecstasy. Sometimes sahajiyas artificially imitate these symptoms, but experienced devotees reject them immediately. The author admits herein that these symptoms are not to be found anywhere but in the body of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. And now we hear another thing. I mean, if you heard that before, you can also tolerate to hear this. The joints of his hands and legs would sometimes become separated by 8 inches. Just, and they remain connected only by the skin. Sometimes Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's hand, legs, and head would all enter within his body. So everything just went inside. Just like the withdrawn limbs of a tortoise. In this way, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to manifest wonderful ecstatic symptoms. His mind appeared vacant, and there were only hopelessness and disappointment in his words. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to express his mind in this way: "Where is the Lord of my life? Who is playing his flute? What shall I do now? Where should I go to find the son of Maharaj Nanda? To whom should I speak? Who can understand my disappointment? Without the son of Nanda Maharaj, my heart is broken." So that was a state of mind, deeply moved by the separation of Krishna. So this is where Vaishnavas aim. So you still have a chance to consider if you want to go there. hearing all this. Yes, so that's actually the goal of life, is to develop love of God. And with love of God comes certain transcendental ecstasy and ecstatic symptoms that might produce very wonderful and amazing symptoms within your body. Anyway, in the material body it's not possible. It's already a transformed material body that can handle this ecstasy and then manifest these features. So, this was what I wanted to share with you tonight about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as a pre-meditation on the actual appearance day of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, from scholar to ecstatic. Would you like to ask something, add something?
A question, since we worship Chaitanya Mahaprabhu actually only in his ecstatic stage of life, why we don't focus so much on his studied part, like of his scholar, that he's Odimai Pandit.
So why we don't do that?
Yes.
Well, in the worship of the deity, you mean also, or in general, when we picture Mahaprabhu?
Yeah, we do like mainly kirtan. We go out on Sankirtan, but we don't focus so much on this studying of
scripture,
of Vedanta and Sanskrit grammar.
Yes. I mean, we have the emphasis, and even if you look closer, like Mahaprabhu, he always actually, in every stage of life, even from his birth, as we heard yesterday, before he even appeared, he arranged that when he comes, there's chanting. He's the controller of material energy. He did not need to obey this 9-month period of pregnancy. He just waited a bit longer, 2 months or something, when the proper time was there for the moon eclipse. He appeared when everyone was standing in the rivers and chanting. And as Krishna Prema Prabhu yesterday was mentioning, also his way to make the women around him, make him pacified as a baby, was to wait till they chant. And then also, even as a boy, when he taught, it's described, he did both. He educated them and introduced him to Sankirtan, initiated him in the holy name. So, but later on, what happened? His chanting, he manifested such intense ecstasy that he was actually only concerned with the ecstatic love of Krishna and chanting. He wasn't anymore the Pandit that took down and taught Sanskrit that was rejected practically. And he was simply manifesting his ecstasy. And as Srila Prabhupada points out in this purport that we read, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is acting in a humble way so that the vision of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu may be fulfilled. And pointing out, we give transcendental literature and Harinam Sankirtan. These two things side by side should be equally regarded because they support each other, they're necessary. But we hear usually more of Mahaprabhu in his ecstatic later in the second half lifetime perhaps, but yeah, maybe it's just a matter of habit to get more into also the Adivila pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
He never wrote books, no?
No, he left us, it said only his Shikshastakam, his 8 verses in the morning.
Maybe he didn't find it so interesting to write books.
I mean, there was something, I don't remember, I would have to speculate. There was once I heard an interesting explanation as to how, or as to why Mahaprabhu did not write books. He actually wrote books through the 6 Goswamis, because he extensively instructed them. There's even whole chapters in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where it's described how he instructs Sanatana and Rupa Goswami. And they actually are Nana Shastra Vicharanayaka, Sadharma Samstapako. They engaged in, going through all the revealed scriptures and establishing eternal religious principles for the benefit of all, on the instruction, based on the instruction of Mahaprabhu. So they actually were his writers. On his order, they left us so many amazing bhakti shastras. Maybe the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Upadeshamrita, and other scriptures from the Goswamis. So this we can consider. They're his arms and hands. They